Good evening, you're watching This Week, a weekly news review program. I'm your host, Andar Gamatar. And for our top stories, 3,336 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed, 2,411 more people recovered, and 15 fatalities reported this week. 2021 presidential election campaigning officially started on Monday. And for the news, stay tuned. 3,336 new cases of COVID-19 have been confirmed from 24th to 28th of May, and 2,411 people have recovered and were transferred to home isolation. 35,000 were tested during that period. As of Friday, the total number of cases is now 55,852, of whom 87% have fully recovered. Almost 10% of the people who were tested came positive for COVID-19 during this week. This indicates that the risk of the virus is still high. Health officials advise the public not to relax yet and keep following the safety precautions, as it will make more time until most of the citizens have gained full immunity. Among the 4,249 COVID-19 patients being treated at hospitals nationwide, 51.6% are showing mild symptoms of illness and 122 are in critical condition. Additionally, 2,568 patients are being treated at home. Infection has increased compared to last week. There have been reported 15 fatalities this week, bringing the total number of fatalities to 263. Mongolia's hospitality and tourism sector were hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic and border lockdown in 2020. This year, tourist camps and tour operators might get an opportunity to resume operations. According to industry experts, the Mongolian tourism sector suffered a 1.5 trillion MNT loss in 2020.
Industry experts expect domestic travel to resume in June. Last year, demand for domestic tours was much higher than in previous years. However, most companies were not well prepared for the uptick in domestic tourists, and preparations for operating during the pandemic were poor. Keeping past mistakes in mind, this year private entities and the Ministry of Environment and Tourism have completed preparations and are ready to host new visitors.
The tourism sector is one of the sectors that can quickly recover after the pandemic. Based on research and studies, we think that Mongolia has all the potential to develop diversified tourism and border area tourism.
Data from 2020 shows that domestic travelers could become a serious client base for tour companies. Companies oriented toward the market for foreign tourists need to change their packages and services to meet the demands of a new target client. In addition, tour operators now are required to pay special attention to safety and disinfection, including having a sufficient supply of hand sanitizers and disinfectants.
For example, what can domestic tourists do when they travel? They can go camping or have a barbecue in the nature. Therefore, we have designed standards and set 23 locations where people can go camping.
The tourism sector was on standby for as long as 17 months. According to industry statistics, 2,300 private entities operating in the tourism sector couldn't provide wages to their combined 88,000 workers, making up 97% of the industry's workforce. In 2019, the sector earned 1.6 trillion Mongolian tukraks in revenue, and turnover was equal to 7.2% of GDP. However, in 2020, industry income dropped by 70% and tour operator sales decreased by 97%.
There are 220 million people working in the tourism and hospitality sectors who lost their jobs due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The situation isn't better in Mongolia. Of course, the immunization rate will play an important role in the sector's recovery. In addition, companies will need to do some rebranding and learn new trends like the creative industry.
Last year, more than 40,000 people visited Huskot province, a number that is not expected to drop this year. Provinces like Khinti, Tornqov, Uvs, and Arkhanga are also likely to attract large numbers of domestic tourists this year.
On Monday, the General Election Commission of Mongolia presented mandates to all candidates running in this year's presidential election. Candidates from the Democratic Party, Mongolian People's Party, and the Right-Man Electoral Coalition were accompanied by their campaign managers when they received their mandates.
The General Election Commission of Mongolia presented a candidate's mandate to Democratic Party candidate Erden.
Appreciate that the General Election Commission made a decision in accordance with the law and regulations. This election is a very important decision. It is not about electing an individual person to serve as president. It's about choosing Mongolia's stability.
The Mongolian People's Party's candidate was accompanied by his campaign manager and the General Secretary of the MPP, Amraysallah.
I wish the General Election Commission staff every success. Not only the Mongolian people, but the whole world is watching how Mongolia will conduct its presidential election. This election will be transparent, open, fair, and timely. The General Election Commission has an important, big role to play in its successful organization. Good luck.
All three candidates have already announced their campaign platforms. MPP candidate Khurelsukh is running with the slogan "Mongolians are the owners of Mongolia's wealth," while DP candidate Erden's campaign slogan is "Mongolia without a dictatorship." Ikhbat, the candidate from the Right-Man Electorate Coalition, is running his campaign with the slogan "Mongolians can." According to the law on presidential elections, campaigning will last for 15 days and must end before midnight on June 8, 24 hours prior to Election Day. This year's campaign period is very short compared to those of previous election years. The three candidates will meet with voters in 21 provinces, 330 SOMs, and the 9 districts of Ulaanbaatar to present their campaign platforms. As the campaign period is relatively short, candidates will need to visit 2 to 3 provinces a day. Voting will take place on June 9th from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Overseas voting will take place on May 30th to 31st, and on June 8th, early voting with sealed ballot boxes.
Around 6% of Ulaanbaatar residents live in Gir districts with single-family homes and yards. If utilized well, Gir district residents have the opportunity to engage in a small-scale farming and even earn income from it. One large family in the Gir district is a perfect example of how this can be done. The family's mother and 2 of her sons combined their 3 yards, turned their land into a vegetable farm, and are now making a living from it.
The area used by the family of Byetsanda for gardening and pickling is around 700 square meters. Here, one family plot is being used solely for vegetable gardening, and one lot is used for warehouses. Byetsanda and her husband, along with her 2 sons, live together in another lot. She notes that the whole farm is the same size as 1/3 of a single family plot.
If a family can use 1/3 of their yard for growing fruits or vegetables, which is around 100 square meters, they can make at least 1 million tugruk a year. If they grow trees and bush seedlings to sell, they can make around 10 million tugruk of profit annually.
A profit of 10 million tugruk is around $3,500, which can be gained from only about 100 square meters of a family's yard. The family grows about 10 types of vegetables and 10 types of trees and bushes. They make enough income for the whole family, equal to the annual income of 3 working families. Byetsanda and her husband have been gardening for about 45 years. She is a professional agronomist, and her knowledge has been passed down to the next generation. Byetsanda hopes that all Gir district families can create income in their yards and create a greener environment.
In 2019, more than 577,000 tourists came to Mongolia and generated 1.6 trillion MNT in income. About 50% of all tourists came through Pointoha Airport, and the rest came through various land ports. Therefore, industry experts plan to attract 500,000 tourists a year by developing cross-border area tourism.
Tourists can travel to the border area for 2 to 3 days. It is possible to travel to beautiful places with nature sightseeing places like Хамрын-Хід, Нүдэнгийн хонхор, Эргэлгийн зоо, and Бүрдэн булаг.
We offer regular routes to tourists. Tourists coming to our country for cross-border tourism will enter through fixed ports. These tourists will travel along the road and return. This operation will be performed by an authorized company. In addition, a group of tourists with more than 5 people will have to follow regulations on how to pass through border crossings.
Russian citizens are able to travel to our country without a visa. Therefore, the number of Russian tourists is growing year by year. Tourists from China used to be issued visas on blue passports, but this practice was abolished in 2016. Many countries around the world are developing cross-border tourism and increasing their profits. Therefore, visa flexibility is the most important factor in the development of tourism in our country.
Most countries in the world have very flexible visa requirements. For example, in Thailand, citizens of 140 to 150 countries can travel without a visa, so there are no restrictions. In order to increase the flow of tourists, other countries have a free visa policy. Mongolia ranks 128 out of 140 countries in the world in terms of international openness and visa regulations. Our country is ranked almost 10th from last.
The World Tourism Organization has issued international recommendations for 14 activities, including airlines, hotels, travel events, and conferences. As tourists travel being fearful of contracting COVID-19 while traveling, experts advise to be well organized when organizing cross-border travel.
Leading credit rating provider FITCH affirms Mongolia's B rating with a stable outlook and forecasts Mongolia's economy to rebound by 5% in 2021, following a contraction of 5.4% in 2020.
Growth of 15.5% year-over-year was reported in the first quarter of 2021, due in large part to a strong export performance. Border restrictions on copper and coal exports to China, Mongolia's most important trading partner, were subsequently imposed in April and May as a pandemic containment measure, following a rush of COVID-19 cases among cross-border truck drivers. Fitch believes this may temporarily disrupt but will not derail Mongolia's recovery. After recent health enhancements at the border, including increased vaccinations and testing capacity, Fitch expects domestic activity to gain momentum in the coming quarters, underpinned by Mongolia's nationwide vaccination rollout, a phased easing of social distancing measures, and targeted relief measures to support households and businesses. As Mongolia plans to immunize all its adult population by July 1st, Fitch forecasts this will pave the way for recovery in consumption, services, and other non-mining activity in the second half of 2021. Fitch projects the budget deficit will be moderate at 5.3% of GDP in 2021 from 9.5% in 2020, and that general government debt will edge down by 2 percentage points to 74% of gross domestic product by the end of 2021, still above the current B median of 68%. According to Fitch, Mongolia still remains vulnerable to external shocks in light of narrow economic base and heavy reliance on external funding.
The regular cabinet meeting was held on May 27th. During the meeting, the government of Mongolia provided the latest updates on opening international borders.
Mongolia plans to open its borders on June 1st of this year, and several regulations were adopted in this regard. Nationals of Mongolia returning to Mongolia are not required to be immunized. In other words, they will be able to receive vaccine shots when they return home. However, foreigners coming to Mongolia must have been administered full doses of COVID-19 vaccine. The Prime Minister of Mongolia, Oyun instructed the relevant ministers to pay special attention to this matter.
During the cabinet meeting, it was decided to immunize breastfeeding and pregnant women with PFIZER vaccines. Details as follows.
Mongolia received a total of 4.7 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines. This week, 100,620 doses of PFIZER vaccines arrived in Ulaanbaatar as part of the COVAX program. Therefore, the government of Mongolia decided to vaccinate pregnant and lactating women on a voluntary basis and by a doctor's prescription. The Ministry of Health's related department has recommended that pregnant women shall be vaccinated with PFIZER based on international research and data. The World Health Organization also recommends that pregnant women with high risk of infection and other health conditions shall be vaccinated under the guidance of a physician or healthcare provider. Breastfeeding women will be voluntarily vaccinated with Sinopharm's Vericell vaccine in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions, if there are restrictions regarding the PFIZER vaccine. By Wednesday of this week, the first dose of the vaccine was administered to 89% of the target population, and the second dose was administered to 46% of target population.
The government of Mongolia is focusing on financing the infrastructure needed for housing projects in the capital city and rural areas. During the cabinet meeting, Prime Minister Oyun gave instructions for the establishment of a working group to reduce and stabilize the prices on essential construction materials.
In 2020, Mongolia imported 240,000 tons of steel fittings for construction and building and produced 12,000 tons domestically. As part of the 10 trillion comprehensive plan to protect health and recovery in the economy, 3,995 households have received 295 billion Mongolian tugrus in mortgage loans. This is 2.8 times more than in the same period last year. In order to provide people with affordable housing and increase the state-owned rental housing fund, a project is being implemented to build 8 apartment districts. This project will be funded by the state and capital city budgets, international development funds, and public-private partnerships. As a result, about 100,000 people will be able to move into 28,569 apartments.
The FIBA 3x3 basketball qualifiers are being held in Graz, Austria. On the first night of the competition, men's top seeds Mongolia were one of 6 teams to win both of their matches, as the first ever Olympic 3x3 basketball qualifier got underway on Wednesday. TUVSHINBAYAR, the first Olympic gold medalist who is being investigated for intentionally causing harm, has announced that he will resign as president of the Mongolian National Olympic Committee. TUVSHINBAYAR, president of the Mongolian National Olympic Committee, said that he would take ethical responsibility and resign on his own request. Narambatar, vice president of the Mongolian National Olympic Committee, said in an interview that TUVSHINBAYAR had not announced in writing that he would step down, only orally. Vice President Narambatar is currently replacing TUVSHINBAYAR and is chairing the Olympic Committee. However, the Olympic Committee has stated that it will not take an official statement until TUVSHINBAYAR's case is finalized in court. TUVSHINBAYAR was the sole candidate for the presidency of the Mongolian National Olympic Committee without any rivals and was elected by unanimous vote of the members. Olympic gold champion TUVSHINBAYAR, who caused serious injuries to Inhwat, was recently released and has been deprived of the right to cross the border. As for Inhwat, he is currently receiving medical treatment in South Korea and has recently regained consciousness. He was taken to South Korea in April for treatment due to a severe brain injury. Well, that's all for this week. Thank you for staying with us, and we'll see you next week with more news and updates. Have a nice weekend. Goodbye.